We're going through the New Muslim Guide. Some of you have a copy of the book, some don't. You can access the content online on the website, free of charge as well. It is newmuslim-guide.com. We're on chapter 10, page 202. We're talking about the family from the Islamic perspective. So last week we highlighted the position of the family and how important a family is in Islam. And we talked about various family members and their rights. In particular, we talked about parents, for example, and the high level of respect and honor and obedience that they deserve from their children, regardless of their age. We talked about the rights of children. We talked also about the kindness and good ties that we should keep with all of our family members and relatives. We then went into the position of women in Islam. And we did a separate presentation about that, went through quite a bit of details, the Islamic perspective on women in various aspects, societal, economic, political, and so on. So here you can see a bit of a summary of that on page 203, 204. They said, for example, Islam grants women the right to inheritance, establishes equity between men and women, grants them the right to choose their husband, grants them the right to keep their maiden name. It makes it the husband's duty to spend on those women entitled to his support. Maybe we didn't talk specifically about that. The Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, said, the person who looks after a widow or a poor person is like a warrior who fights for Allah's cause, or like one who performs prayers all night without slackness and fasts continuously, never breaking his fast. Meaning the reward will be so vast and so great, similar to someone who is making great sacrifices or striving hard for the sake of Allah. That's if they financially provide support, for example, for a widow or a poor person, be they male or female. Some of these rights, of course, sound quite basic, but when you think about 1,400 years ago, these rights didn't exist in the world, in particular for women and those categories of people that were weaker in society's eyes. And we mentioned even some examples of how in the Western world some laws were only established less than 100 years ago, giving women some of these basic rights. Women that Islam enjoins Muslims to look after. So if we are mentioned in particular that the mother has a very special place. So when the Prophet, peace be upon him, was asked by the man, he said, who is most deserving of my companionship or my good company, my good treatment in my life? Like the number one person out of everyone. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, your mother. He said, okay, and then next, who would come after? He said, your mother. He said, okay, and then who next? He said, your mother. He said, okay, and then who next? He said, your father. So he emphasized the mother in particular. And we know in many families, perhaps the mother lives longer than the father, and especially in her older age, if all of her children have moved away, so on and so forth, she might find herself in a very vulnerable and difficult situation. So the mother is very deserving of our good treatment. And that means in all forms. Your time, your kind words, financially, so on and so forth. The next category they talked about is the daughter. So we are talking about a society, and unfortunately, as we mentioned in the statistics last week, that in the world today it's still a crisis in many countries where people favor their son over their daughter, or favor to have male children over female children. So we said the United Nations estimates 60 million girls are not alive because of sex-selective abortion, meaning someone did an ultrasound, they saw they're going to have a girl, they decided to kill the baby before it was born. So Islam also came at a time where in the Arabian Peninsula, people preferred males over females. They saw them as being the ones who will fight in the army, they will work in the fields, they will do many things, and the family will benefit from that financially, they will be proud of them, blah, blah, blah. They will carry on the name of the tribe, whatever, all these kind of things they would look at. So they would literally commit infanticide. They would kill the baby after she was born. So the Prophet ﷺ came with words condemning such things. It's also in the Quran, clearly condemning infanticide, whether male or female. And the Prophet ﷺ also gave strong encouragement. So in some families and in some societies, the main thing they think about when we talk about children. So for example, I have 3 children now, and some colleagues who are non-Muslim will tell me, oh, so many. How you will be able to afford it? And their baby is 1 year old, and they are thinking about the university expenses, and they are thinking about how I can afford it. Oh, this is too much. I need my retirement to be like this. And so they see children as a financial burden. While as Muslims, we believe no. Every child I've had, it's tried and tested. Allah has given me an increase in my wealth. With every child, I got a new car, I got a new promotion at work, I got some form of financial compensation. And this is from Allah. This is a guarantee. If you believe that, you will get it. Even I give you a simple story. In the last aqiqah, I invited friends and family to come for a feast after I had the baby. This is in Islam. You should show shukr to Allah, show thanks to Allah by inviting people and having food and so on. The least you can do, you sacrifice an animal, you distribute the meat to friends and family and the needy and so on. So we sacrificed, then we had the restaurant prepare the food, we invited the people. I invited a number of people, double the number I invited showed up. So at that time I was financially squeezed. I said, how am I going to pay for this? And then subhanallah, suddenly somebody came to me, he said, I didn't give you some salary for a few months of work you did in the past. I thought maybe you can use it today. He handed me the envelope. Another guy said, I have a gift for you because you had a baby I would like to give to you. Another one came and gave me this, that. I left there with maybe 9,000 ringgit in my pocket. And I came there saying, I'm not sure how I'm going to pay for the dinner tonight because I didn't have enough money in my account to pay for it. So this is if you have the right belief, inshallah, which we don't claim that we have, but Allah is very kind and generous. With children comes sustenance and wealth. So Islam began to emphasize that. You don't kill your children because you said we cannot afford to have them. So they would literally say the girl is a financial burden because she's not going to work and she's just going to take money, so we will get rid of her. This is the kind of mentality they had, which is an awful mentality, and some people still have it today. So Uqba ibn Amr radiallahu anhu narrated that he heard Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam say, whoever has 3 daughters and he remains patient with them, provides for them, and clothes them with from his money, they will be a shield for him from the hellfire on the day of resurrection. So the Prophet ﷺ was reminding that when you spend on your children, when you spend on your family, when you show kindness financially and otherwise, this is all good deeds for you. You are benefiting from that. So don't be stingy in what you give, because in the end you are going to benefit in the hereafter also. Number 3, the wife. Aisha radiallahu anha said, the Prophet, the Messenger of Allah, she's the wife of the Messenger of Allah, and she narrated this, that he said, the best among you are those who are best to their wives, and I am the best amongst you to my wives. Of course, we mentioned what happens. It's easy for a man to be nice at work with his co-workers. It's easy for a man to be nice in public or at the mosque with the people he sees here and there. But it's another story about how does he treat his family at home. So this is a time where no one will see, no one may know about it. Some wives are in very abusive relationships and they will never tell anyone about it. And the man is seen as some kind of a social butterfly and a nice guy and a great guy and patient and kind and generous. And in reality, that's not the truth. And the reason he feels he can do that, because he may be physically stronger than the woman, he may be financially the provider and she's dependent upon him. Whatever it might be, he sees that he has some form of strength over her. So of course Allah warns about that in the Quran and says, don't think you are that strong, because above you is Allah. So whatever you do, you will be accountable for it. So the Prophet ﷺ said the test to know if you're really a good person and you're really a true believer is how do you treat those in your care who might be weaker than you, and you might get away with supposedly abusing them. You will not get away with it, obviously, in the hereafter. Islam considers the relationship between husband and wife to be complementary, each of which remedies the deficiency of each other in building a good Muslim society. Any questions about that? These are just some categories. Of course, you owe goodness to even your grandmother, your granddaughters, your mother-in-law, your aunts, your nieces. I mean, all those kind of women that are in our life, and even those who have no relation with you whatsoever. So a widow, for example, a divorcee, someone who cannot maybe financially provide for themselves, you take care of them. This is something very noble in Islam. No place for a struggle between the sexes. Here they talk a little bit about this issue, which is maybe brought to the surface in the past decades as we talked about women's liberation, the sexual revolution, so on and so forth. This was something especially in the West and maybe now starting to come into the Middle East and other countries, where it's being presented that men and women are at war and there's some kind of fight and struggle going on between them, and one has to try to beat the other. And men have been winning for a long time, and now it's women's turn to try to win. Yeah? And there's a lot of emphasis and highlighting on that. Now, of course, Islam recognizes and addressed the issue of sexism, oppression, discrimination. It recognized that issue occurs. Something as simple as a person favors their son over their daughter. That's not allowed in Islam. The Prophet ﷺ said, if you buy gifts for your children, you buy for all of them. You cannot buy for one and not the other because this one you feel is more important or going to bring more to the family name in the future or something like this. Yeah? All of them have the right to education, so on and so forth. So Islam established the fact that there is no preferential treatment, there is no preference. At the same time, it still recognized the fact that men and women are different. Different biologically, different psychologically, different emotionally, so on and so forth. So Islam doesn't obligate men and women to the same things. For example, if there was a war and this country is invaded, Islamically, men of fighting age have to join the army and defend. It's an obligation upon them. Yeah? It's a religious duty. Women, no, they don't have to. Are there women that fought in Muslim armies and participated in warfare in different ways? Yes. That happened even in the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. But are they obligated to do so? No, they are not. They're not expected to do so. And this is still the case also in many countries and so on. So Islam recognizes there's a difference. Those roles are complementary, as we mentioned. We don't say one is better than the other. We live in a society, unfortunately, where it says you have no value if you don't have a dollar sign attached to your job. So you don't make a salary. So we wouldn't consider mother, for example, to be a noble career and great job. We would say, oh, that's all you do? And even some women say this to other women. It's very disgusting. You find a woman dedicated herself to take care of her family, and other women tell her, oh, that's all you're doing? Oh, you don't have a career, you don't have this, you don't have that. What? So she's expected to do both. While the man, he is not expected to be a full-time father and a full-time provider. He shows 5 minutes of his face here and there to his kids, and he mainly works outside, and they said he's a great man, he's doing a great job for his family. And all he is doing is financially providing. Actually, the mother is playing a more important role. So we need to shift the mindset a little bit, and Islam emphasizes. That's why it says, oh, it's so great to be a mother. You deserve automatically respect. So much respect from your children. Why didn't give it to the father if he's the financial provider, for example? Because there are things that are more important than money, actually, right? The love and the proper nurturing that produces a good human being. As we mentioned last time, I think there is no product more valuable than a human being. So any company anybody works in, it's not providing a product or service more important than the upbringing of the future generation. So that's not exactly what they say here in the struggle for the sexes, but it gives the idea that there is no need for such thing. We are not supposed to look like we are vying against one another, competing against one another, fighting against one another. It's not supposed to be like that. We are partners. The Prophet ﷺ said men and women are the shaqiq, the full sibling of. So in Arabic, we have different words for like a half brother or sister versus a full brother or sister. Because there's a difference if you have same mother and father, or you have only same father and different mothers. Isn't that right? I have half brothers, for example. I have step brothers and sisters. The relationship with them is not the same as my full brother who comes from same mother and same father, for example, right? So the Prophet ﷺ used the word, he said women are the full sisters of men. Meaning they are from the same family, the same blood. They are not supposed to have these kind of feelings towards one another. Okay, any questions on that? That was my little rant for the day. So now we will talk a little bit about something technical. In Islam, there are also some boundaries between men and women. And that is not meant as a form of oppression. It's not meant as a form of degrading but they are boundaries there for various reasons. To protect people physically, to protect people emotionally, sexually, so on and so forth. Yeah? So we are talking about boundaries in terms of the physical interactions between men and women, in terms of the even visual interactions. So for example, seeing a woman when she's not covered properly, wearing the veil, and so on and so forth. So to understand how that works and the rules behind it, we need to understand the categories of women in a man's life. So we are talking now from the male perspective. Who are the different types of women in my life? Meaning there's someone like my wife, who there are no boundaries between us whatsoever. There are women in my life like my mother, my daughters. There are less boundaries than there are between, for example, the stranger walking down the street who I don't know at all, and there's no blood relation between us. Okay? So we'll talk a little bit about this. This concept is strange and foreign for people who grew up in Western countries, or for people even in Malaysia in many cases, where there is no real limitation between interactions between men and women. So even the shyness and modesty at times is seen as strange. So I've even had comments here at Al-Khadim from Muslims when I'm dealing with the lady and I'm looking down and I'm not staring directly at her, and she's like, "Why are you not staring at me? What's going on? Something wrong with me? I'm ugly? What?" So this is a strange way for a Muslim to think, actually. It's meant as respect, it's meant as honoring, it's meant as respecting the boundaries that have been set by Allah for you. Yeah? So this is the spirit behind it. So let's talk a little bit about this so we can understand it better. Categories of women in relation to a man. Okay? So the first category is, as they put it here, she could be his wife. So in this case, he is allowed to enjoy her company in any way he likes, just as she is allowed to enjoy his company. In fact, Allah describes each one of them to be a garment for the other, revealing an excellent image of a perfect physical, emotional, and mental union. So there are no restrictions whatsoever in seeing the person, for example, naked, in being sexually intimate with them, in talking to them in any tone, in any way that you want, flirting with them, joking, laughing, so on and so forth. And that's the original state of affairs between a husband and wife. It's not supposed to be a relationship of no physical contact and intimacy, no kind words and lovingness whatsoever. That kind of a marriage obviously becomes dead and soon falls apart or breaks apart. Allah says in the Quran, they are clothing for you and you are clothing for them. And the beautiful thing about clothing is the thing that protects you, it's the thing that conceals your faults, it's the thing that beautifies you. So even when we talk about our spouse, we say our better half. Why? Because they bring out some good things in us. They also put us in check in some of our bad things. So my wife is the one who can scold me in ways no one else ever will. I will not accept it from anyone else, actually, to criticize me or to tell me you shouldn't do that, why you are getting angry, so on and so forth. I will not accept it from strangers or even friends and so on, but I will accept it from my wife. Yeah. So this is a special relationship that comes through the bond of marriage. So we don't have that kind of relationship through common law, for example. So in the West, we will say, "Oh, this is my common law partner," meaning we've been living together for a very long time. We are intimate. We have children. So we are as if we're married, as if we're a family. I remember my boss from Sweden in Ericsson. He came to the States, and he said, "Just before I came, I went and got married." I said, "How long you been with her?" He said, 20 years. And they have 2 kids. I said, "What's going on? Why would you go and get married?" He said, "For tax purposes in America." They said, "Very good if you are married." So, of course, that's not how we look at marriage. Some people said, marriage is just a paper, it's meaningless, it's garbage. No. Marriage is something that changes the relationship between husband and wife, and Allah called it in the Quran, mithaqan ghalidha. It's a heavy, serious contract. It's not something entered into lightly, and it's something that necessitates a certain level of good treatment and rights and so on and so forth. So automatically that person should be the person you treat best in your life. Number 2, she could be a relative whom he is never permitted to marry at any time in his life whatsoever. So this is what we call in Arabic, mahram. A mahram is somebody who's closely related to you. There are blood ties, or it could come through marriage and other things. So necessarily you are not allowed to marry them. So they give all the listings here, 13 different categories. So we'll go through them a little bit so we have better understanding. Number one, the mother and above. Above means generations above. So your grandmother takes the same category, your great-grandmother, from your maternal side and your paternal side. So in Arabic, we have a different word for your maternal grandmother, different word for your paternal. Same for the aunt and uncle, so on and so forth. Yeah? In English, we don't have that usually. We just say aunt or uncle. In Arabic, it's not like that. It's more precise. So that's why you'll find here that they double up on the listings, because the paternal side and the maternal side. In some cultures or societies, they will recognize, for example, paternal relatives, but not maternal relatives. The paternal side is always very important, but the maternal side, meaning the side from your mother, is not important. No, in Islam, both are equal, both are recognized. So we mention here the mother and above. Number two would be the daughter and above. And again, we're talking from the and below. We're talking about the perspective of the man. So for example, my mother, my daughter, that would include below, meaning my granddaughters, my great-granddaughters. Yeah. So even whether they came from a son or a daughter, maybe my son has a daughter, that's my granddaughter. So there are also, I'm never allowed to marry her, and there are there's a lifting of the limitations and restrictions. So for example, I could see these women without hijab. They don't have to be fully covered in front of me. I cannot see them naked the way I can see my wife, of course. There are still limitations. In some societies, these limitations don't exist. So you find even men or women going in front of complete strangers completely naked. Islamically, that's unacceptable. You are not allowed to expose yourself in such a way. For the Muslim man, as we mentioned, it's from the belly button to below the knees. So this area is considered a private area. You would only show that to your spouse. You would never show that to anyone else. Not in front of your children. You cannot go in front of them in your underwear or your short shorts, for example. Yeah, that's not something considered modest. Number three, we have the sister. And that includes, for example, paternal or maternal stepsisters. So also through marriage. Yeah? So your parent marries someone, now those stepsisters or also your half-sisters, if they're only related through one relative, they also fall in the same category. You are never allowed to marry these people, of course. Yeah, that's incest. In some cultures or societies, past and present, it is practiced. It's something unacceptable in Islam. Number four, the paternal aunt, the maternal step-aunt or paternal step-aunt, the paternal aunt of one's father and the paternal aunt of one's mother. So your aunts and also your great aunts, we call them in America, so meaning the aunt of your mother, the aunt of your father, these women necessarily, you are never allowed to marry them, and there is a lifting of restrictions in the physical interactions and in the visual interactions. So you could shake their hand, you could hug them, you could kiss them on the cheek, no problem. This is number four. This is so here you can see they split it. They said the paternal aunt and the maternal aunt. Yeah. Number six, the brother's daughters, the stepbrother's daughters, and below. So these are your nieces. Your nieces, yeah? So your niece from a full brother, from a half brother, or a full sister, a half sister. Now here they separate it again because we have different words in Arabic. So we would say, the daughter of the brother, the daughter of the sister. This is the term used in Arabic. They don't just use niece either way. So in English we have one word. It refers to the daughter of your sister or the daughter of your brother. It's the same thing. But both of them, you are never allowed to marry these girls. You are also considered a mahram to them. You can see them without hijab. You can have physical contact with them within limits, of course. And you can also have, for example, be alone with them in seclusion. You can travel with them, be their escort for them to go on a journey, so on and so forth. So that's 6 and 7. The niece. 8 is the mother-in-law. whether he is still married to her daughter or has divorced her, and the grandmother-in-law. So your wife or ex-wife's mother, you can see her without hijab, you can never marry her, regardless of whether you are married to the daughter or not. That would apply also to her mother, so meaning the grandmother of your wife or your ex-wife. Okay? The stepdaughter. So there are no restrictions between the stepfather and the stepdaughter in terms of seeing her without hijab. He's never ever allowed to marry her. The son's wife and below, such as the grandson's wife and so on. Yeah? So meaning the father-in-law to his daughter-in-law. So any woman that his sons have married, these are women that he could never marry, and he can also see them and treat them just like he would his own daughter. The stepmother and above. So for example, your father married another wife, or he married someone else after your mother passed away. This would be the stepmother category. Number 12, the foster mother. Now, these are relations that are established through blood or through marriage, and this is in most common societies and so on. There's a third category in Islam, which is established through breastfeeding, through what we call in the past a wet nurse. So in many societies, past and present, a baby might be breastfed by different women. Some mothers cannot do it, or they are quite exhausted, they find it too difficult, or they don't have the time. Whatever the case might be, they might hire or pay someone to do that. That woman becomes, if she did it enough times, she should have fed the baby 5 times from hunger to being full suckling. So if she's done that, that woman becomes like a foster mother to the baby. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had foster mothers like that. He considered them like his mother until they passed away. He would care about them, visit them, see them without hijab and so on. So these women and their relatives become like blood family. So their daughters and things like that, or other babies that they've breastfed. Yeah? So this expands the bonds, because some people, when they look within Islam, they say, well, then it's very restrictive. If men are only allowed to interact freely with women that they're related to or through marriage and blood, then the circle might be very small. Well, the circle is very small in a Western society where you only have one kid. But in some societies, like in Malaysia in the past, where everyone is having 10 kids, necessarily it's going to be a big family actually. You'll have a lot of nieces and nephews and so on. Yeah? I think my wife has 65 cousins, something like that right now. Why? Because her mom has 8 brothers and sisters. Her dad has 8 brothers and sisters. They have their kids, and you can imagine how fast and vast the family tree expands. Yeah. So if people are living in the more traditional way, where they would have a lot of children, you would find that you have a huge, vast network of men and women in your life. It's not that you would live in such a restrictive way, but Islam gave a third way beyond blood and marriage, and that's through breastfeeding. So in some societies that's practiced, but they don't allow that to then cause some restrictions in marriage. So in Islam, the woman that breastfeeds you becomes your mother, and her daughters become your sisters. So these are people you would never be allowed to marry, and you interact with them freely and so on. The foster sister, they mentioned that here as well, is the daughter of the foster mother. A man is not allowed to marry any of the relations through breastfeeding, just as he is not permitted to marry any of the relations through blood. They give you a chart on page 207 to give you kind of a breakdown of all the possible relatives and the various forms and so on. Yeah? Any questions about that? Yeah. No. So the sister-in-law, so this is where we can talk a little bit about some of the exceptions. The exceptions that in many societies people feel they are blood related or they are family and they have a strong bond between them is usually the sister-in-law and the cousin. These two in Islam are excluded from this category. Meaning, you can marry your sister-in-law if your brother passed away or divorced her. It's not forbidden in Islam for her to be married. So it's also forbidden for her to be seen without hijab or for there to be physical contact and so on. Some people become very comfortable with the sister-in-law because obviously you're interacting with your brother all the time, so there's a tendency to say, well, she will sit with us just like she's one of our sisters, we'll see her without hijab, we'll hug, we'll do whatever, and so on and so forth. But that can lead to some issues. I remember one sheikh who was doing family counseling, dealing with a woman who said, 4 of my children are born from my brother-in-law, not from my husband. Because what happens is when those relations become too casual, especially because there is a close relation, the person starts to do a bit of comparison. So the woman starts saying, I wish you were more like your brother. The brother is better looking than the husband. This and that, and so on and so forth. Or vice versa. The man starts doing that about the sister-in-law versus his wife. So because they are related to one another, those 2 ladies or those 2 men, there's this tendency to start to compare. And shaitan starts to put a bit of temptation perhaps there in some scenarios, and it can end up leading to crossing the line and destroying family relations and so on. So Islam is quite strict about that. One man asked the Prophet ﷺ, he said, the Prophet ﷺ said, إِيَّاكُمْ وَالدُّخُولَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ. The Prophet ﷺ said, woe to you about going into the home when a woman is there all alone. So meaning your friend is traveling and his wife is alone, you're not allowed to go in his house and hang out with his wife in his house alone, in seclusion. That's not permissible. Yeah. So the man said, okay, what about as an exception, the sister-in-law? My brother is away, so I will visit his wife, I'll take care of her and so on. The Prophet ﷺ said, Al-hamu al-maut. He said the sister-in-law is death. It's the worst one. Because there is a constant interaction and there's a tendency over time perhaps for some feelings to develop and for something wrong or inappropriate to occur. Yeah? So there needs to be a certain kind of shyness and modesty between the man and his sister-in-law. The other one is the cousin. Now in some societies, a cousin is like a sister. So they find it quite repulsive and disgusting to say that a person can marry their cousin. While in other cultures, the default is when they want to get married, they will most likely marry a cousin. They will not marry outside of the clan or the family or the tribe. Yeah? Now some will say, well, that will be genetically too similar. Maybe there will be defects and so on and so forth. A program that I saw in the United States, a documentary, they were talking about genetics and so on. So they said the chance for there to be a genetic birth defect due to cousins getting married because they are too closely related is the same probability as if you marry any other stranger off the street. So the reality is all humans, if you go far back enough, are related actually in one way or another. But the cousin is considered not close enough of a relative that it's forbidden to marry. So the forbidding, as we mentioned, would be the siblings and so on and so forth. Yeah? The nieces, the aunts, the uncles, all that. But the cousin is someone who you're allowed to marry, which means it's not allowed for a man to see his cousin without wearing hijab. It's not allowed for him to hug her or kiss her on the cheek or shake her hand. It's not allowed for him to be alone and in seclusion with her, in a house, for example. It's not allowed for him to be her escort in travel the way he would be for his mother or his sister and so on. Yeah? So these are 2 exceptions in this category that is not common for some cultures and people. Any questions about that? I forgot, did I answer your question? I did, right? Okay. So yeah, the aunt's husband would also be just like the brother-in-law, for example. Yeah. So your uncle, there are no restrictions. You can shake hands, so on and so forth. But your aunt's husband, no. That wouldn't be. Although in America, for example, my uncle's wife, I call her aunt, but she's not really my aunt through blood. So if my uncle divorced her or passed away, technically I'm allowed to marry her, Islamically. Yeah, there isn't that mahram relationship. Does that make sense? Your what? Your grandfather? Okay. No, your mother and father's aunts and uncles also in the same category as the aunt and uncle. So when we talk about each category, it's also up and down. So mother, grandmother, daughter, granddaughter, aunt, great aunt, which is your mother or father's aunt, would be in the same category for the man, or for you it would be the great uncle from your mother or father's side. Does that make sense? The great uncle meaning your mother or father's uncle. They would just be like your uncle, same thing. Temporary mahram, there are some which are temporarily forbidden while you're in a state of marriage. Yeah? So for example, you cannot marry a woman, like in Islam, a man can marry more than one wife. So he cannot be married to two sisters at the same time. It's not allowed. But if he divorced one sister or she passed away, he could marry another sister. That would be permissible. So he's temporarily forbidden from marrying her, and then made permissible once there is divorce. No, because the sister-in-law is exempt from that category. Is not part of this category because, as we mentioned, the kind of issues that sometimes might happen between the in-laws and so on. Yeah, cheating on the spouse and so on, unfortunately. Okay, page 208. This is the third category. She could be one he is allowed to marry, what we call an ajnabiyya. Ajnabiyya literally means a foreigner or a stranger. And the reason that's said is because there aren't these close ties. So there are 7 billion people on the earth. We are all humans, but obviously some are my family and closely related, and there are ties and bonds between us through marriage or breastfeeding. And then there are others who are just complete strangers. So those who are complete strangers are the category of women that I'm permissible as a man to marry from. Meaning I could marry any woman out there from amongst those categories. So regarding this category of women, Islam has laid down a number of rules and criteria which govern a Muslim man's relationship with such women. By doing this, Islam aims to protect people's honor and block all the means that are bound to lead to evil. So for us, fornication and adultery and rape and different things that might occur, we consider all those to be negative and unacceptable morally. Yeah, whether a country considers it to be a crime or not. So there are obviously things that lead to that. People don't have sexual relations based on nothing. It starts from something. Yeah, it starts from a glance, it starts from a touch, it starts from a word, it starts from being alone, so on and so forth, till it reaches to that level. So Islam looks to cut the paths that might lead to that kind of action, which can be devastating and have so many ramifications for the individual and society. Somebody might say, why is fornication or adultery so bad? Well, the reality is it leads to children being born out of a proper family structure. And we know how difficult it can be for one parent to raise a child. We know the impact that that has on children when they don't have both parents in their life. And if there isn't a sound relationship between the parents before they have relations and they go ahead and have the child, well, that can be catastrophic. And that has an impact throughout society, obviously. There's the spreading of sexually transmitted diseases. There is the emotional and psychological scarring and impact that ends up having when a person cheats on their spouse or significant other, or when a person has sexual relations with someone and for them it meant nothing, for the other person it meant something very deep emotionally and love and so on and so forth. So there are many aspects we could talk just about that for hours. But hopefully we have some appreciation for that. Allah, who has created man, knows exactly what is best for him. And He says in the Quran, does He who created not then know, while He is the all-pervading, the all-aware. So definitely Allah knows what's best, and we believe when He puts some restrictions, those are actually for our own benefit and protection. Okay, so what are the rules that govern the relationship between a man and a woman? What exactly is it that they're not allowed to do if they are not in these two categories, the marriage or the mahram? So they are in that third category where they are just strangers to one another, even if they are friends or co-workers and so on. There are some restrictions in how they interact with one another. Yeah. Now again, if you are thinking from your cultural perspective or your upbringing, these might seem extreme. For you, you will say, well, this is not the way that we lived, this is not the way that we were brought up, and you may feel there was nothing wrong with it because it never had any negative impact in your life or as an individual. But if we look at society as a whole, definitely we can find there are some clear problems. Just the statistics I read last week, I think were enough to show that there is a real problem going on, and the victims in that are usually women. So number one is lowering the gaze. Necessarily, if we talk about men and women, they are different in their biology and in their psychology. So one thing is that men are very visual. Men are very visual. So they are sexually usually aroused through visual things, maybe more than women are. Yeah, and this is what I think a number of scientific studies have shown, and it's quite interesting to read about that, how the male and female brain work. They're quite different. And that's why sometimes it'll be surprising for a man if he sees a very beautiful woman with a man that's not very good looking. And he will say, why are these two together? Well, she finds other things in him that are attractive. Sense of humor and this one and that one, whatever the case might be. So lowering the gaze, it applies to both men and women, but in particular this is important for men. And this applies even if the woman is covered. So this verse came to the believers in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where men and women were living in a conservative way. And women were covering, and they were having a kind of limitation in the kind of way that they would interact with one another physically and so on. But still Allah said men should lower their gaze. Necessarily that action of lowering the gaze should have an impact on the heart. It should have an impact on the soul. It should have an impact also on your mannerisms and behavior. So if you are restricting your eyesight, then necessarily you should also be restricting the way you talk, the way you behave, the kind of things you do. So the Muslim man who's trying to lower his gaze is not the one who sexually harasses the woman at work or goes and hits on the woman who's sitting in the restaurant. I mean, these two don't fit together, obviously, right? So this is a kind of mindset and one of the manifestations of that. Yeah. So you don't have to lower your gaze, obviously, with your wife or with your relatives, your mahrams, your mother, your sister, and so on. Number two, observing modesty in speech. So necessarily the way men and women speak to each other is different than if they are speaking to the same gender. I think we all, if we have some exposure to that, we would be aware of that. So when men talk to each other, it's different than if a man's talking to a woman. When women talk to each other, it's different than if a woman's talking to a man. Now, in particular, if we're interested in that person and we're trying to attract them, then the words we use, the tone of voice changes. So for me, for example, I married my wife, and I married her without dating her first or knowing her for a long time, none of that. And we had minimal interactions with a chaperone there. We decided we wanted to get married. We proceeded. Immediately after we did the marriage, the way we started talking to each other, sexual talking, flirting, this, that, it's something common and normal that would occur between men and women if there is some attraction between them. But Islamically, a man and a woman is asked to respect the other party and control the kind of language they use. So trying to flirt with them, trying to use certain kind of tone of voice, so on and so forth. So Allah says in the Quran, even reminding to women who sometimes may tend to soften their voice or use a certain tone of voice or language when dealing with men, and we are not talking about the husband or the relatives, obviously, we're talking about the third category. It says, because there are some, when you use that tone of voice, then their heart is a bit corrupted, so they start to have some hopeful desires. Meaning, the man starts to think, Oh yeah, she's interested in me. Oh yeah, maybe I can get her. Oh yeah, it looks like she wants to be with me, and he starts to pursue, and she actually didn't intend that, didn't want that. So when men and women deal with each other, it should be quite formal. Just you can imagine an interview scenario. If a man and women are in a job interview, there's no overly joking and flirting. We just met for the first time. It's very serious. I'm trying to get the job. So the way you talk, the way you interact should be like that. Now, what I've seen from many who are Muslim, there seems to be no sensitivity to this issue. So you find them laughing and joking, and then for me, when I see that, I'm like, oh, they must be brother and sister, or they must be closely related or married to one another, and no, actually, there's no relations whatsoever between them. So that's not appropriate Islamically for that kind of talking. Yeah. Number 3. How can you recognize if it's wrong or not? It would be, and this can happen even in text messages and emails, and it's a bit dangerous in this day and age. So what you need to ask yourself, if you're a man or a woman, if my spouse were to read this, would they be okay with what I'm saying? Or if you're younger, if my parent was to read this, would I not be embarrassed about anything that I wrote there? If you would, then it's not appropriate, actually. You should not be sending that to someone who is not your wife or not your close relative. This one is also about the physical seclusion, avoiding private seclusion with non-mahram women altogether. It's called in Arabic khalwa. I think in Malay you use the same thing, khalwa. So it means a man and woman being alone in a place where no one can see them, and it's possible for something to occur between them that would be inappropriate. So somebody might say, well, what are you saying? That we're animals? So you just leave two men and women, a man and woman alone in a room, and suddenly they're going to, like animals do? It's not like that. Well, the reality is, of course not. It doesn't happen like that. But over time, definitely inappropriate things can happen. And whoever thinks that they don't is naive. A study I was reading in the United States said 60% of all relationships start in the workplace, for example. So if someone says, oh, men and women always together, men and women always close and interacting or being in seclusion, oh, nothing will happen. It's just like if it was men with men or women with women. No, it's not the same. Men and women necessarily have a desire for the opposite sex. Necessarily there are things that will attract us to an individual. That's just the way we're built. It might be different things that attract us. It might be over a long period of time. But definitely, this is something that can contribute to that kind of thing. Because again, as we mentioned, when you're even, maybe you're not in seclusion physically, but just writing where you feel no one else can see it, sometimes you might feel casual to write and speak in a certain way because you know no one else is going to read it, no one else is listening. But if you ask yourself, if my spouse read that, would I be okay with it? So the same thing occurs when you're in seclusion. If you're sitting and other people are there, then the way you talk and behave is going to be more professional and more appropriate. But if no one is around, then necessarily the barriers might start to come down if you're not very God-fearing. Number 4, wearing the hijab. So this is the full covering that a woman would wear when she's outside. She needs to wear that in front of men who are not her husband or her close relatives, the mahram. So the third category, a woman necessarily needs to cover. Now, that doesn't give, obviously, men the excuse, if she's not covered, to be staring at her body and so on and so forth. So they still are supposed to be respectful and not, looking at a woman in a way that's inappropriate or making her uncomfortable, whether she's covered or not. But women will be considered sinful if they are not properly covered in front of men that they are supposed to be covered in front of. The man is also sinful if he's looking, of course. It's a two-way street. But this is one of those rules that exist between the men and women who are not married or not closely related. Now, the first and second category, the husband and wife, there's no limitation on what is allowed to be seen. But the second category, obviously, as we said, there are limitations. So a man is not allowed to see his close relatives fully naked. That's not considered something appropriate, nor are they allowed to see him fully naked. There is a minimum amount. For the woman, there's a bit of a difference of opinion among scholars. But in general, what they would say is that the man who is closely related can see the woman's hair, neck, face, arms, lower part of the legs. But in general, the torso or the top of the lower body, all these areas would be considered private area that a woman wouldn't be exposing or showing in front of males, even if they're relatives. So there's still some obvious minimum standard of modesty. Yeah. For some cultures and societies, that's something foreign, as we mentioned. Any questions about that? Where did this jump from? Oh, they're talking here a little bit about hijab. Yeah, go ahead. Okay. We mentioned it. We mentioned it at the beginning when we were talking about the second category. I don't know if you were with us. Yeah. So we just said that there are still restrictions on how much a person can expose, regardless of how close you might be. So going fully naked in front of people, even if they're of the same gender or they're closely related, is not permissible in Islam. So a man has a minimum amount that we said from the belly button to below the knees. For women, there's some difference of opinion amongst scholars. So things like, for example, a woman breastfeeding in front of other women. Yeah, according to some that would be permissible. According to others that wouldn't be permissible. Some scholars make a difference between the type of woman. Is the woman Muslim or not? If she's a Muslim, is she practicing or not? Meaning, if the woman, there's a sense that she's seeing someone without hijab and then going to others and describing what she looked like, that defeats the purpose of hijab. Or in this day and age, people taking pictures, keeping the digital pictures, sending them out, sharing them, and the woman's not properly covered. So the person also needs to be a bit cautious and try to control the environment that they're in and what might be occurring. So you may not be doing something wrong, but somebody else might be doing something wrong that violates some of your privacy. So we should be a little bit cognizant to that fact. I think one of the problems, if we don't have a bit of that shame and a bit of that shyness, it can die off while a person's pretty young. So if a person's always used to seeing others naked and going in front of others naked, they lose that sense of modesty and shyness. And when you lose that, it trickles down and it starts to affect other areas of life. So I remember for myself, for example, growing up in America, there's no boundaries between men and women. So my classmates in high school are female and my teacher's a lady and so on, and we're staring at each other, and there's no limitation on how we behave and talk and flirting and all that. There's touching. There's no kind of boundaries whatsoever, actually. Yeah. And then I went to Mecca and Medina when I was maybe 16 or 17 years old. And I stayed there for 1 month during Ramadan. So in Ramadan, it's all acts of worship, and it's very devout, and there's separation between men and women, and people are dressed and behaving modestly and so on. So I was in that environment for a month. Suddenly, I'm traveling back to the United States, and something had occurred, and I didn't realize that it occurred. We stopped in Frankfurt, Germany. Frankfurt, Germany, things are pretty open. So you go into the convenience store, and the magazine with a fully naked woman, pornographic magazine, was sitting on the counter, no problem, where children can see it and so on. And there were billboards, and the supermodels there half naked and so on. So as I'm walking, suddenly I'm seeing this thing, and I'm like, I think I shouldn't look at that. That's wrong. And I was seeing all the ladies who are scantily clad, walking through the airport, and I'm feeling, yeah, there's something wrong. This is not right. So I had never felt that before, because I grew up in an environment where you become desensitized. So when we talk about these things, for some people it's weird. You're like, I can't imagine it. What are you saying? Why should this exist? I don't see any problem with what I'm in. Well, because we haven't tried the other side, it's hard to appreciate what the other side means or what it's like. So it was only once I had been in that for a while, and we believe in Islam, when you do something wrong, it's like getting cut. It's like scarring you a bit. And you know, scar tissue doesn't have any feeling. So the more you would get scarred in the same place, the more you'd become dead to any feeling. So we believe sins, they do that to your heart. When you commit a sin, and sins are committed with what? committed with your eyes, committed with your ears, committed with your tongue, committed with your limbs. These are the inputs and the sources to the heart. So the heart gets gashed, and as it gets gashed, it gets scarred, and as it gets scarred, it gets desensitized. So in Arabic they say, كثرة المساس تولد قلة الإحساس. The more you touch something, the more you become desensitized to it. Like the baker who's touching hot things all the time, after a while he picks up the burning thing, he doesn't even care. And someone else comes and he's like, man, that's so hot, what are you doing? How could you grab it? Yeah? Because he became desensitized. So the same thing spiritually. Sometimes we're in something which is morally wrong, and we don't even feel it or realize anymore. Yeah? So I kind of sense that in Malaysia. Because it's very, very open, so many Muslims, even for them, these concepts are foreign. It's weird to them. What do you mean I'm supposed to look down, and I should be careful on how I talk, and I should do this and that, and we never grew up with that. What is that? Yeah, well, that's not your culture, but it's part of the religion, actually. And there are many benefits to that, inshallah. Spiritually and societally, if that's a word. Page 210, it talks a little bit about hijab. Oh, sorry, question.
Okay. So these rules,
Yeah.
are they based on forming and shaping the individual and how they operate out in society, or are they based on changing society to the individual in a specific position?
It's both. It's both, because you can't have one without the other. So you can't have a good society without a good individual, and you can't have a good individual without a good society. It's kind of a chicken and egg thing. So this is one of the problems, that if we don't change ourselves within, because some people, their attitude becomes, well, if you can't beat them, join them. So everyone around me is like this, so I'm not going to be the weirdo. Yeah? So for example, in America, maybe I gave you guys this story before about physical contact. So I went for a job interview, and in the job interview, the recruiters are all ladies. So 3 friends, we went together, and we're Muslim friends. We all graduated from the same university, from the same college, with the same exact degree. Yeah. So we said, 2 out of 3, we said, you know what, it's wrong to shake hands with women, it's wrong to do this and that. So we're going to just tell them we're Muslim and explain from up front and see. They might think it's weird. It's a multinational company. It was like number 11 on the Forbes 500. So we said they probably won't hire us. We're going there with our beards. We're going there. I mean, we're going to be the black sheep. And the 3rd friend, he said, no, I can't do that. That's weird. They're not going to be able to accept it. We're in America. Americans don't do that. So we're just going to go along with what everybody else is doing. So in the end, we went through a few different interviews. We went through this long process. The ladies were really understanding when we explained to them that we're Muslim, why we don't want to shake hands. They explained to other managers, so the others didn't embarrass us. They said, oh, you're the Muslim people? Okay, no problem. We won't reach our hand out. Nice to meet you. So by the end, my friend and I felt there's probably little chance, because they're going to think it's something so strange we're not going to get hired. They called us into a conference room, so we thought maybe it's about this, that they were going to say, hey, this is wrong, or this is gender discrimination or something. So they put contracts down and they said, we want to hire both of you. We're giving you the job offer. So we signed the contract. We were so happy. We went out, we called our 3rd friend. We said, what happened? He said, no, I didn't get the job. So we said, subhanAllah, we got the job when we did the things that we thought will be weird to people, and they won't accept because society doesn't do it. Yeah. So we also can't wait for society to change and accept everything before we say we're going to start implementing it in our own life. We have to do it. And the interesting thing in that story was we went to training the next week. When we came in, it was just the 2 of us. And the trainer in this big lab with computers and everything, we said, where's everybody else? And she's like, we didn't hire anybody else, just the 2 of you. And it was a job fair that went on for like the whole weekend, and hundreds of candidates came. We thought they were going to hire a bunch of people, and they just hired the 2 of us. So it was really like a strange occurrence and an amazing event that made me more convinced that I shouldn't be embarrassed about trying to do what I believe is the right thing to do. Does that give you like a connection? Because the idea is, if I say, well, until society is observing all these things, then I will start doing it. No, it cannot happen. I have to start doing it as an individual. It can have a good effect on my moral character. So for example, these are not meant because I look down at women. This is meant to honor and respect women. This is because I'm saying, you have such an important position, you have so much right to your own privacy that I will not violate that privacy in any way. And it also sends a message, because sometimes what happens in male-female interactions, from what I've seen, is there's a pressure on the woman to behave and dress a certain way so that she can maybe try to get a certain response. And she's almost being told by society, well, you have to dress in a sexy way, and you have to behave in this way, and you have to do that. Otherwise, you're not that beautiful, you're not that important, you're not that great, you don't have a value or a worth, and so on. There's this pressure put by other women, by men, by companies, by media. So this is also to try to break women free from that, and also men to say, listen, because there was a time when, just a few decades ago, they tried to put men and women in the workplace together, and men were still sexually harassing women and treating them horribly. And only now, once we put very strict laws, have men started to back off, where you can't pinch her bottom as she walks by, and you can't call her like this and refer to her like that. These kind of things literally occurred 20, 30 years ago in the United States. This is something we would consider now outrageous, but it was something common, and there are court cases around it and so on. Only once those strict laws had to be put into place. So this is more your own internal moral governance, where you say, yeah, maybe you have a desire to say that or do that or look at that, but you shouldn't do it. And this applies even to things like pornography, looking at images online. Just because she's not right there in front of you doesn't mean it's not wrong. Or just because it was taken through a hidden camera and she doesn't know about it doesn't mean it's appropriate. So also with the advent of technology, there are many applications for the way that this needs to occur. For example, appropriate speech. It's not only in talking, it's also in text messaging and Facebooking and whatever else. It goes into all the different areas of life. Did I address the question? I'm not sure. Not really? Say it again. Reword it so I understand it then in a different way. Yeah.
People in a position of trying to specifically qualify.
Okay. Qualify what?
Life isn't anything but qualifiable. When you walk out that door, you can interact with any number of people in any number of occasions in any number of cultures.
Sure.
So, where is the nobility of the individual in relying on their heart to actually
Mm.
if a person walks out the door and they have a question,
Yeah.
better check the book. Instead of saying,
Okay. Okay. This is a fundamental and core issue that you're talking about, and I'm glad that you brought it up. The religion of Islam literally means to surrender. Yeah? To surrender oneself. How do you surrender yourself? It means that you ask Allah, what is it that you want? Yeah? But how do you then know what Allah wants? This becomes the question. Because what happens for many people, and especially where in the West, what I noticed, my mother, for example, she'll say, I recognize God. I believe there's a God, no problem. But then when I say, okay, there's a right way and a wrong way to do things. There's a way that God wants us to worship Him. She can't accept that. She'll say, but I'll just do whatever I want to do. And I'll follow whatever I feel. So if I think something is good, I'll do that. If I think something is bad, I won't do it. The problem with that is you and I and any other people will never agree on what's right and wrong. Because we have different experiences, different personalities. I think even twins, genetically the same, raised by the same parents, in the same society, won't agree on everything. So necessarily we'll have 7 billion religions, because everyone will have their own religion. So for us, religion is a way of life, and the guidelines in that way of life come from Allah. Now Allah doesn't give all the rules. The reality is there are so many other details to interactions, right? He gives us only some guidelines. Now we might feel that's complicated because we never had any restrictions in this area of life before. But the reality is it's not that complicated. There are 3 categories of women. There's your wife, there's your family, whether that's through blood and marriage and breastfeeding, and then there are those who are others, and that's the majority of women. So these rules apply to how you deal with the majority of women. Doesn't mean you don't interact with women, but you have some respect, extra respect, hyper respect, when we compare it to most cultures and societies. Now you might say, well, the other culture or society, they don't do this or they don't accept that. Well, we live in a world now which is encouraging us to accept other people as they are and to respect their culture and religion. So we should be free to say, this is my way, I hope you can respect it, I hope you don't mind. So for example, I work in a multinational company, American company, I'm in senior management, and I'm there with my beard, and I'm the only one who's bearded, everyone else clean shaven. But no one gives me a hard time because that's it. We live in a culture where you don't give people a hard time about that. You just stay quiet. He's doing something, we think it's weird, but whatever. He's free to do it. And I respect them. In my office there are Sikhs, they come with their turban wrapped. No one tells them you shouldn't come with your turban, it's weird. We don't wear hats at work, for example, right? So everybody just kind of respects other cultures and religions. But for me to shapeshift and be like a chameleon, every time I'm dealing with different people, I'll do it their way. Well, now they're doing like this, I'll just go along with them. Now they're doing like that, I'll go along with them. Also, that way, then we don't have any identity, we don't have any religion, we don't have any backbone, because we're just kind of slithering along with whatever people want. So the Muslim is someone who says, I'm not enforcing this upon everybody, but I'm saying I'm going to try to practice this way because I believe it's right. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. So I think the idea is just internally the person saying, even if I find some difficulty in this, many men find it hard not to stare at a lady as she's walking by, for example. But it doesn't mean that it's right or okay just because a person is inclined towards doing that thing. So this is the area of surrendering and saying, oh Allah, I know you don't want me to do it, even though I feel like I want to do it, I'm not going to do it because it's wrong. I'm cheating her, I'm violating her rights, I'm not going to do it, for example. Yeah. Did that answer the question this time, or sort of? Okay, good. Yeah. If all Muslim men observe this, then how will they get married? Yeah, so this becomes an interesting debate for Muslims in Malaysia, I've noticed, or even for Muslims in the West and so on, or non-Muslims. So they say, well, if you don't have boyfriend, girlfriend, and you don't go through that process, how do you end up getting married? Well, there are different ways, and that could depend on the culture. So for example, in Arab culture, what will happen? Arab culture, the male or female reaches a certain age or stage in their life, they say, you know what, I feel like I want to get married. So now the search begins. So they will make it known. So I would tell, for example, my mother, my sister, my aunts, my grandma, whoever in my life, and I would say, I really want to get married. So they would say, well, what are you looking for in a wife? Well, I wish to marry someone like this. And you would give some description maybe about their age, about the area of life that they work in, their goals in life, their objectives, this, that, certain criteria that matches what you hope to be and live in your life, for example. And they'll start to ask around, they'll start to search amongst their network, their friends and family and so on. If they find someone who's appropriate, then they usually would engage on your behalf. So they would talk to maybe the mother of that girl and say, we have our son, you know, he's this age, this is his area of education, this is his cultural background, these are his goals in life, so on and so forth, and he's interested in getting married. Is your daughter also interested in getting married? Would she be interested in someone like this? If they say yes, then the two parties will meet each other, then they start to talk to each other, get to know each other, see if they're really interested, they'll meet multiple times and so on. But the meetings wouldn't be unchaperoned, it would be with a chaperone. So for many of us that would seem childish or silly, or that's not the way we do things. But these are safeguards that we would put in place Islamically, yeah? Because young people, if they start to date, more than likely after a while it gets physical. It's only a natural result of those kind of relationships, right? And there's a certain charm to that, because I think at the same time men and women also are looking, if they're pious and religious, for a certain level of chastity. So I'm not interested in marrying a girl that's been with so many other people. I'm not interested in marrying someone who has already been in all these different kinds of relationships and so on, right? And hopefully the good Muslim woman is also looking for a man who hasn't been through that. So there's something to be said about marrying someone that is preserving themselves, if you will, yeah? Especially in the society that we live in today, it's quite difficult to live in that way, perhaps. Okay, did that answer the question? I mean, this is one way that it might go about. So the Prophet ﷺ said, when you are looking to get married, then the lowering the gaze rule doesn't apply anymore. You're allowed to look. Yeah, so you can look at that person as you're sitting there talking to them and so on. You wouldn't see them fully without hijab, but you can look at their face and talk to them and interact with them in that normal way and so on. Yeah, you can even do that without the other party knowing. So even if it's you see them from far away and you're looking at them to see if that's someone you're attracted to, obviously physical attraction is part of it, but it's not the only aspect. So beyond that, the person then wants to get to know the person, know about them religiously, spiritually, their personality, their hopes and dreams and so on and so forth. Now what this does, in my opinion, it cuts through the BS. You know what BS is? Yeah, it cuts through that. Why? Because when you date, there's a lot of BS. The person puts on this facade, so fake, chocolates and flowers and honey and sweetie, and then he gets married and he's a wife beater. Well, what happened to the honey and the sweetie that was going on in the dating days? As soon as he married her, now he just tossed her aside like a piece of garbage and treats her poorly and badly, and this is not acceptable. So the reality is, from the beginning, you need to show who you are and be real. This is who I am, take it or leave it. Accept me, this is who I am. Now, just meeting in that way is not enough also for the two parties to be okay. So usually what will happen, if you have close-knit societies where people have social relations, they necessarily know things about each other. So the father goes and asks about the man. Is he a hot-tempered guy? Does he use bad language and get abusive when he gets angry? What's he like in business? Is he honest and trustworthy and straightforward? Is he like this? Is he like that? So you can know about his character, because when he comes, he's wearing his suit and he's speaking with polished words. Well, that's not a real image necessarily of who he is. So there's also this kind of investigation that goes on to make sure that this is the right person. And as we said in the last session, Islam views that real love, lasting love, strong love comes after marriage, not before marriage. So saying that, oh, we fell in love, I mean, look at how many of these relationships that even turn into marriage fail. Where's the love? If there was all that infatuation at the beginning, in my opinion, it's not love, it was more infatuation, it's physical, it's things like that. Oh, it's the sense of humor, I'm attracted to this, I'm attracted to that. Well, that stuff all fades. You like the beauty will disappear, sorry, as the person gets older. You like the money, maybe the money will be gone one day. You like this or you like that, those things never last. So if you don't love the person as a person and their soul and who they are, then that's not going to work, in my opinion. Yeah, Allah knows best. But there's different ways that it can occur. That's one scenario based on one culture. There is no strict guidelines or rules on marriage on exactly how it has to come about, how the two people meet each other, or how. But you cannot cross these kind of lines. So you meet some woman, doesn't mean you're going out with her, then you move in with her, then you're sleeping with her, then you say, honey, how about we get married? And I'll tell you I love you after 2 or 3 years of sleeping with you. I mean, it's not a way. It's not a way for a Muslim. Yeah? Okay, any other questions or comments? Yeah. Uh-huh. Okay.
Football, gymnastics, gym,
Yeah.
swimming.
So there are some alternatives, and I think Malaysia is a bit respective of that they will create solutions for ladies. So it's a ladies-only gym, or it's a ladies-only facility, or there are times of day where it will only be ladies, so they can feel more free and they won't be restricted by all of the hijab requirements. And that's something even in the West. In America, there are ladies-only gyms for non-Muslims because women don't feel comfortable to work out in front of men, for example. I mean, it's something natural. Yeah.
It's a spectator sport, right?
Mm.
And I noticed that there's certain kind of stages that when women in hijab, there's nothing wrong with watching men in shorts running around.
Oh, okay.
You know?
So yeah, I mean, the concept of modesty goes both ways. So if women are not staring at, if men are not supposed to be staring at women when they're not properly clothed, then obviously women also are not allowed to look at images of men or in real life if they're not properly clothed. If they are properly clothed, the rules are a bit relaxed in women looking at men versus men looking at women. It's a little bit of a bias there. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's wife, for example, was watching the group that came and was doing a performance with spears in the mosque. They came from Abyssinia, from Africa, from Ethiopia, and they were doing this physical show. And she was watching it, and the Prophet ﷺ didn't say, oh, you can't watch them do that or something like that, right? So it's not completely forbidden. But the idea is those kind of gazes that are done with sexual desires, that are done with maybe a wrong intention, or is having a kind of impact on the person, arousing them and so on, then obviously they need to lower their gaze and not do that. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
This is my greatest struggle, most especially since coming out of this Ramadan. I think it's dangerous to this manner.
Yeah.
I'm a marathon runner.
Okay.
And although I wear a scarf when I run, I wear the compression wear and everything. And when I run, I'm not seeking the attention of men.
Mm.
I'm running because I love it.
Yeah.
I want Allah as well. I just don't know how to reconcile it.
So the person, the Prophet ﷺ said, the sin, what is a sin? He said, a sin, ma haka fi sadrik. He said, the sin is the thing that irritates you in your chest. So if you get the feeling in your heart that it's wrong, then it's wrong. So meaning if you're having that strong doubt and feeling that this thing is not right and I shouldn't be doing it, then 99% of the time you're right, you shouldn't be doing it. And the other criteria he gave is that, and you would be ashamed or embarrassed for people to see or know about it. So sometimes the sin, we convince ourselves it's okay when we're alone. So we do that thing because no one's watching, because no one's seeing. But if you really gave that litmus test that if my mom and dad walked in right now and saw it, or my wife and children walked in right now and saw it, would they be 100% okay with the thing I'm doing or not? If they're not, then 99% of the time what you're doing is a sin. Even if you don't find 100% clear criteria in Islam telling you it's wrong. So we need to also keep in mind the spirit of the law and not the letter of the law. This is the point you were trying to get to maybe, right? Yeah. But the idea is the letter of the law is still important. So we don't use the spirit to interpret it away, as some people sometimes will try to do. So they'll say, well, I'm really a good person in my heart, so it doesn't really matter about all the other things that I'm doing. No. The good heart is reflected in the good actions, and the good actions are defined by Allah. So Allah says, this is the thing that I think is good and I love and I want you to do. So the person says, I'm here, O Allah, to do it. So, the concept of hijab is a concept that starts in the heart. It's not a physical thing, because we have some women, they wear the scarf on the head, but they're very inappropriate and immodest in their behavior. They're promiscuous, they're living a bad lifestyle by Islamic standards morally. But just because they put the scarf on their head doesn't mean that, oh, this is a very modest person. No. At the same time, we don't say that somebody who's living a very modest life sexually but not covering themselves properly at all can say, I'm living as a very good, modest Muslim. We would say, well, you're doing part of it, but there's still another part that's missing. Yeah? So we need to keep that context in mind. Now, one of the concepts behind hijab, we didn't get into it yet, and I think we're out of time for today, but we'll go into it in the next session. One of the concepts of hijab is that the thing, it's not just I'm covering my skin. So for example, I see ladies, she's wearing something skin tight and skin colored. So from far away, you think she's naked. She's wearing this arm thing and whatever, and it's like, and then she says, I'm wearing hijab. It's like, what kind of hijab are you wearing exactly? You're trying to trick people? I don't understand. It's kind of weird. Like skin tight and it's skin colored. So it defeats the whole purpose actually. So that's one of the concepts behind hijab. Hijab is concealing your beauty. So if the thing you are wearing is very tight or see-through or very beautiful in and of itself, it kind of defeats the spirit of hijab. So we don't want to be so literal when it comes to hijab that we said, okay, well, I got the scarf on and I was wearing the thing that was covering the inches of skin that need to be covered, so I must be fine. No, it needs to go a little bit beyond that. How to reconcile and balance between the two? At times we can, at times we cannot. And that's where a bit of sacrifice lies. That a person might have to give up something that they do love, but they give it up for their love of Allah. Yeah. SubhanAllah. So the Prophet ﷺ, he gave us another criteria. He said, Al-halalu bayyin wal-haram bayyin. He said, clear, the halal, the permissible and lawful, is very clear. And the haram, the completely impermissible, is very clear. In between them, there's a gray area. There are some doubtful things. When we start doing it, we feel a little bit torn. Is it right? Is it wrong? He said, these ones, for your own peace of mind, avoid it. It'll make you feel better spiritually. Yeah. And this is a test we all end up going through in our own ways. For you, it's this issue. For everyone else, they have their own issue or many issues. Because it's a constant choice in life. Should I do this or shouldn't I? Should I say this or shouldn't I? How should I feel about this or that? So the person is constantly torn. Now, when you feel the decision is between my love for this thing or this person or this whatever it might be from the worldly life versus my love for Allah, you always want to try to choose your love for Allah over it. If you do that, necessarily you will find a good result. So you might say, well, I love this thing too much. I feel giving it up is heartbreaking and it's too hard. I can't do it. Well, Allah can replace that feeling of heartbreak with something different. So Allah says in the Quran, يَحُولُ بَيْنَ الْمَرْءِ وَقَلْبِهِ. Allah can come between a person and their heart. Meaning, He can make them love that which they used to not love, but it's really good and they should love it. Allah can make them suddenly love it. So a person might find themselves trying to do a good deed and it's really hard on them. And they just find it so hard on themselves. And they pray to Allah and they ask Allah, and Allah changes their feeling towards it, and they somehow start to love the thing that they used to dislike, which is good for them. Yeah? Or the other way around, they might have loved something which was wrong, which was bad, and they had such a deep love for it, and they just couldn't get their heart to stop loving that thing. But they turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they said, I'm willing to give it up even though I love it. And they found that feeling faded and disappeared completely, and they even started to dislike the thing that they used to like. So there are people, for example, who love alcohol or drugs so much, and they were addicted to it, and it was something quite difficult. But once they gave it up, and Allah even turned it to the point where they disliked that thing and they became an opponent of it, and they encouraged others to leave it and so on. So it's not impossible for that kind of revolution to occur. Yeah, and Allah is the one who can facilitate it and make it easy. So we should turn to Him and He will guide us in that, inshallah. Any other questions or comments? We'll we'll go to the next section. We didn't finish the whole chapter in the next class. Yes, please. It depends on what the profession is. It depends on what the seclusion is. So for example, let's say it's a man and woman in a hospital room. The nurse comes in to treat the patient and the door is open. This is not the kind of seclusion we are talking about. We're talking about doors and windows are closed and no one's going to walk in at any moment, and the people feel completely comfortable, and over time maybe something will develop. So we're talking about, for example, it's common in some societies for men and women to be roommates or housemates. They have no problem with that. So men and women will live completely together. And they are strangers, but they said we'll share the rent, we'll share the expenses. Islamically, we would say that's not okay. Have housemates that are males if you're a male and females if you're a female. That would be better. Does that answer? So it depends on the nature of the profession, depends on the reason. Whenever possible, we would prefer, like for example, medical care. It would be better for a male to get the treatment from a male, for the female to get treatment from a female. So we wouldn't recommend a woman, for example, to go to a male gynecologist. No need. Go to a female if there's the option. If there is no option, it's a different story, because medical care is a necessity. If, for example, the best specialist in that procedure is a male, then you go to the best. You don't sacrifice your medical health care for this issue. Yeah. So the Prophet ﷺ had his wife treated by a male doctor, you could say, or practitioner at that time. Yeah. Any other questions, comments? Okay, we'll go ahead and end there. Jazakumullah khairan. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. How many people feel they learned something new? Were these things we already were aware of, or is it something new today? Can I see by a show of hands how many learned something new today? Okay, great. Alhamdulillah. Great. Okay, thank you so much, and we'll see you all next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah.